Good afternoon and welcome to today's APM webinar, Developing Skills for Continued High Performance in this Changing World. I'm Robert Allen, APM Branches Manager, and I'll be your host today. It's great to see so many people joining us today, and I hope this finds you well. Please be aware that today's webinar is being recorded and you are currently on listen-only mode. That's not to say we don't want you to get involved. Please feel free to submit your questions via the main control panel, and time dependent, we'll answer these at the end. We're also going to have some polls throughout the presentation, so please get involved in those because we're really keen to hear from you. This session will count towards your CPD and should last no longer than an hour. I would personally like to thank all the volunteers from the APM branches and the APM SIGs for all their efforts with making these webinars happen. So, I'm delighted that Garry Murphy and Lisa Street from Turner Townsend has joined us today. And on that note, I'll pass over to Garry.
Hi Rob, thank you very much. Hello and welcome, and thank you for joining us today for this APM webinar on the topic of developing skills for continued high performance in this changing world. On to the next slide. So a bit about us today. My name is Garry Murphy. I am Infrastructure UK Head of PM for Turner Townsend. I'm also a volunteer in the Scotland branch of the APM and a fellow of the APM. And with me virtually this afternoon is my colleague Lisa Street, who is an Associate Director based in our Manchester office. So a bit about Turner Townsend. We're an independent professional services company, and we specialise in programme management, project management, cost and commercial management, and advisory across the real estate, infrastructure, and natural resources sectors. So a bit of an introduction to our webinar this afternoon. Now these past few months have certainly presented unprecedented challenges and change for everyone, not just on the way we do projects, but also societal and how we work and interact, and obviously safety and health in this pandemic. This has meant changes to us as a profession in how we manage projects, and obviously new ways of working. Also, it's brought a number of different skills that we as project managers need to embrace to be successful in our work. And through our experiences, we'll highlight the challenges faced and share the developments and insights that we have developed to help us as a profession keep focused on project performance. I will focus more on the challenges that the pandemic has brought in terms of the impact on delivery of projects, and also how the profession and industry has had to adapt to these new ways of working and period of uncertainty. Lisa will focus on new skills required and bring some personal insights and experiences to light. But before going to that, I just want to talk about obviously our profession has played a significant role in helping the UK government and society respond to the pandemic. I'm sure a number of those in attendance there with APM Awards on Monday night, and a number of winners were folk and great examples of how the project profession has helped society and government respond to this. So we've seen examples of the Nightingale hospitals, the ventilator challenges, and most recently the vaccine task force. And I think that the ability to research, test, and bring a vaccine to market, I think in 9 months, is an absolute testament to the project profession. But in our presentation, we'll discuss the disruption impact on projects, the effects on productivity, and how our profession and industry is adapting. We'll talk about the changing communication needs and acceptance of new channels and tools as a result of the pandemic. We'll talk about the specific considerations and requirements of stakeholder engagement and the increased demands for connecting with and motivating remote teams. Will be question and answers, as Rob says, at the very end. So Rob will moderate and present those questions to Lisa and myself. But before we go into the presentation, we're just keen to understand a bit about those in attendance, and Rob will just conduct a short poll just now. So Rob, over to you.
Thank you, Garry. So as Garry mentioned, we're keen to learn more about those that have joined us today. I can see that over 120 people have joined us, which is great. So we're keen. How much years project experience do you have? so less than a year, all the way up to 10 years plus. So I'd leave it open for a little bit more, but I can definitely see, and to share with you, Gary and Lisa, that we're roughly tracking around the 50% of 10 years plus,
Right.
all the way down, and then the other year ranges are around the 10 to 15%. So it looks like you've got an experienced bunch on the webinar, which is great. So I'll bring this to a close. I can see 85% of the audience has completed that. And I'll just share the results. So yes, 10 years plus, we're looking at about 43%. And then the other years, we are tracking around 12% to 15%.
Okay, so quite a diverse skill set, or sorry, diverse experience here. And one last poll certainly for my section, and this relates to a lot of stuff we're going to discuss later on, is are you working from home today? And I suspect, given that we are pretty much most of the UK is in various degrees of lockdown, I suspect most of us will be in various degrees, but just interesting to see how many of us are certainly working from home today. So Rob, over to you. You can.
Certainly. So that's live on the screen, and over 80% of our attendees have started to submit their answers. And yeah, Gary, I think you got a crystal ball. The yes shot up really high right from the outset, and it's just over 91%, with the no's at 9%. So I'll bring that to a close. I think it's safe to say 90% with the yes and 10% with the no.
Excellent, that's really good context. Thanks, Rob. Right. So I could spend an hour, and indeed certainly much more, on the impact of COVID on projects and this changing world. However, I just wanted to kind of set the scene about the changing world we're living in and how this affects us as project professionals in what we do. So as project managers and project professionals, we like numbers. I just want to give some context here, some of these numbers. Top left is 21%. So an APM survey was conducted in March, noted 21% of respondents experienced delays due to COVID-19. Now, I do suspect that if this was undertaken now, we'd probably see an increase in that. And interestingly, of those that had experienced project delays, 39% of those responded stating that delays were caused due by colleagues or stakeholders being unavailable, which I thought was really, really interesting. Top right is 75%. This was a McKinsey report called The Next Normal Construction. And it was construction industry focused, so apologies for that. But it noticed that 75% of the respondents noted that the pandemic will accelerate change to the construction industry, and I think that's very important. Every pandemic and crisis does bring about change. I think we're starting to see the result of that impacting, certainly in our profession. 101%, this was the increase in Zoom share price from January 31st to the start of pandemic. And again, this just shows the new ways of working, remote work environments, remote teams, how we communicate with stakeholders, communicate amongst our project teams, etc. It just shows the uptake of that has obviously been a resultant impact on the share price of Zoom. Unfortunately, I didn't buy shares at the start of January, but yeah, maybe that's one I need to look out for. 92%, I thought this was really interesting. There's 92% drop in rail passenger journeys during the first stage of the lockdown. Now, where this impacts us as project professionals, particularly those in the kind of transportation sector, affects business cases. Where a business case probably stacked up and there was a positive business case in the past for projects as a result of passenger usage. Obviously, that has changed now, so we're starting to see a number of organisations and clients and certainly projects reevaluating their business case, and may mean that projects are stalled or in effect delayed or even cancelled because of the result of the pandemic. And bottom left is in a similar vein. We're starting to see we're certainly seeing the aviation sector showing significant signs of stress, and it's recommended or certainly projected that it's going to be 2022 before air passenger numbers return to pre-COVID levels, and even at that, there's some uncertainty as to whether they will return to those levels. So again, we're starting to see, particularly in the aviation sector, a number of projects being stalled or even cancelled as a result of the impacts of this pandemic. But it's not all bad news. And the bottom right-hand side, I just wanted to give a figure here. It just shows 70% during April 2020 of this year. There was 70% less carbon emissions from April in 2019. Obviously, primarily a result of people not commuting to work, effect and impact of the lockdown, but just shows you that there has been some positive impacts as a result of the pandemic. So how has this, excuse me, how has this changing world affected our projects? And the next couple of slides are very much construction industry focused, but we are seeing similar effects across other industries where our profession operates in. So I wanted to add this slide for context. This is a study that we in Turner Townsend did early part of this year, and it looked up at the market outlook for UK infrastructure projects. So the key message from this is that at the start of the pandemic, saw the sharpest decline in tender price index since 2008, and that this will likely continue into Q2 2021, followed by a gradual recovery. Now, I will caveat that this is obviously linked to when we can suppress and control the pandemic, and obviously the good news we're seeing now is about vaccines and stuff like that to suppress the pandemic. But this just gives context to show that we have seen a significant impact in certainly projects. Before that, confidence was building in Q4 of last year, so there was an upward trajectory in terms of confidence. And interestingly, from a UK government perspective, is that spending on large infrastructure projects is expected to grow from 0.8% of GDP to 1.2% of GDP, which is consistent with UK government's agenda for build, 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 and which is positive for us as a profession in how we can support these ambitions. And this next slide is how COVID has affected project schedules. Now, again, it represented only, but to assess the impact of reduced productivity and longer lead-ins for key materials, we have taken a kind of project with inherent challenges and built a case study example, in this case, a 50-story high-rise tower at a critical construction stage. And the prototype model has shown a 17% increase in overall project duration as a result of COVID-19 impact. And I'd stress that this is a simplified example. However, the associated schedule impact is consistent with what we're typically seeing across a number of projects we're involved with in the UK and wider afield. And I'm sure a number of those in attendance will have had similar experiences. That said, I would note that we have seen some instances of where projects have accelerated as a result of the pandemic. So those are the last two slides just to show just how projects have impacted certainly from a cost and a time perspective. So this next slide and this chart in particular shows where we see the kind of three phases of disruption and how this correlates to productivity levels from certainly a construction industry perspective, but also from a wider industry perspective. The red line here is the productivity curve. So at stage one, which was back in March this year when pandemic hits, we see lockdown, significant restrictions on movements, obviously essential workers only, essentially industry did shut down. And the focus of our profession and industry indeed becomes crisis management, and more importantly, the well-being of our project teams. So impact at this stage, it was obviously a picture of economic uncertainty, delayed investment decisions, and significant reduced productivity causing severe stress on our projects. And also the lack of pipeline and the lack of confidence in the market drove the risk of insolvency, particularly on the small, medium enterprises. So a significant impact, significant uncertainty and significant stress on our industry and indeed in the project profession. And in stage 2, we started to know a bit more about the pandemic. We saw the R rate reducing, and with that we saw the lifting of some lockdown measures and restrictions and a slow return to normal activity and productivity. And the productivity impacts started slowly increase as a result of social distancing and slow return to work. The focus at this stage is still about project recovery and getting projects on track. However, as I say, necessity is the mother of invention, and we did start to see some advancement and adoption of new and more efficient ways of working. And then we moved into stage 3. As we recovered, we started to see the impacts of altered lead-in times for key materials and manufacturers adjust to reduce production rates. And particularly in the construction industry, we saw materials, particularly such as aluminium, glazing and timber products, was a significant stress and choke in that supply chain, which was manifesting itself in reduced productivity, particularly on construction sites. But the focus at that stage was obviously in helping supply chain, but also it was on how we learn from the crisis, and more importantly, how can we accelerate the change in adoption of digital tools and technologies, and also bringing efficiency in how we work and how projects are delivered. But that said, the challenge is also how some people say there maybe should be a stage 4 here, and particularly in the most recent history, and we've seen in the last couple of weeks for various guises of local lockdowns and national lockdowns across the UK, there are thoughts that there should be a stage 4, and that is planning for further disruption until such times that we have a vaccine and we can suppress the pandemic. And until then, how public health requirements have changed to mitigate local or national spikes is far from certain. And I suppose a challenge for us as project professionals is how we factor this into plans for project costs, timescales, risks, and contractual obligations is absolutely key. So from our experiences, we've kind of captured some learning on how organizations and their projects are emerging from the crisis. And some of those organizational projects who have been successful have taken a number of approaches, which I'll summarize below. Particularly around supply chain, those projects which have had strong control of the supply chain certainly have emerged stronger by proactively managing and communicating with the supply chain. Again, in the similar vein, those organizations, projects that were support the supply chain, particularly we've seen UK large infrastructure projects and programs that are heavily public sector funded, certainly have been more proactive in protecting the supply chain. For example, driving early payments to keep the supply chain liquid during this period of uncertainty. Scenario planning, we've seen a lot of organizations have really mature level of scenario planning, which led to ability to quickly respond to this change and come out of this market or come out of this uncertainty really so much better than certain number of peers. And site working and access, we start to see a higher level of innovative thinking, which became evident, enabling maximum working levels and productivity, obviously at the same time not breaching social distancing rules. So those were successful strategies we started to see for some organizations and projects emerge from the crisis. So evolving for the new future, what we're starting to see and tied back into some of the challenges mentioned earlier on, we're starting to see a number of projects and organizations and programs and portfolios. Indeed, they've evolved, particularly in what the business case is and also how it needs to be delivered. So refocus on business case has been key for a number of certainly projects in the past number of months. Also, taking back control of the schedule. So whilst rebaselining is important, ensuring the scope to complete and scope to go is clear, and then building that scope back into strong forecasting mechanism will also be very much key to project success. Also, looking at the new contracting strategies and driving that forward, organizations and a project manager will need to recognize the scale of control that they need to put in place if they are to actively turn around their projects and supply chain. And we're starting to see a number of organization projects do this to respond and adapt and to evolve as we move forward. And certainly, last but not least, is certainly enhanced communication, team working, and as project professionals, a lot of our time is spent communicating within our project teams, but also within sponsors, stakeholders, etc. So, greater agility within project teams and enhanced communication techniques and getting close to stakeholders is going to be absolutely vital as we evolve into the new future. On that last note, and this kind of relates closely to what Lisa is going to speak about, in particular the skills required in a changing world in where we deliver projects and her personal experience. So I'll pass you on to Lisa, and she will take the next stage of the presentation forward.
Thank you very much, Gary, and thank you, Rob and the APM for having us today to share with you our experiences and what we found over the past 8 months. Gary's taken us through setting the context for where I'm going to talk to you about the skills and setting what has happened to the market. And Gary, in his earlier slide, talks about the 3 phases and beyond, starting with the pandemic and the areas that we focus on within crisis management, business continuity planning. And then he talked about disruption and project recovery, and then the recovery phase, and whether that actually should be split into four phases where we're looking at new ways of working. And that's what I'm going to take you through, is those 3 phases, and from my personal experiences, the skills that's needed to take through each of these phases and how they've evolved and developed and continue to develop today. So I'll take you through to the next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you very much. Thank you. So this part of the session is going to be focused on the people and behaviour elements of the BOK in the 7th edition. So as a bit of a friendly reminder, I've popped them up on the screen there, just so we're all familiar with them. I'm going to share with you my personal experiences and the areas that have impacted me the most over the past 8 months, and ultimately how they've influenced how I've then delivered projects and how I've seen others deliver projects. So we've got the BOK here, we've got engaging stakeholders I'm going to be focusing on, as well as leading the teams and working professionally, and how these all contribute to our project success and project performances. I'm going to heavily talk about instances around communication and the changing needs and acceptance of new channels and tools that I've encountered. And Garry gave us the fact about Zoom. So we'll have a look at that and how we've all been, I think we have all had a lot of Zooming and video conferences over the last 8 months. Stakeholder management and looking at the specific considerations and requirements that have evolved over the past 8 months. And leading the team, the increasing demand for connecting with and motivating remote teams, as we're all sat, 90% of us on today's call are all sat, we're not sat in an office. And so what I'm going to probably say today is probably what you've all experienced yourself. It's just bringing that to light and sharing my story with you, and realise we're all in this together and we're all in it for the long haul. So I'm keen to hear from your views as we go through this section. So there's going to be 4 polls, which Rob will MC for us and share the data, just like we've had with Garry before, and just to see where your thoughts are. So the aim is to share with you what I've learnt, how I'm actually applying this learning, areas for continual development, and I'm continually development as we speak, and some thoughts for future consideration and top tips. And the reason why I'm focusing on these skills within the BOK today is because these skills for me are the ones which I feel like they are the ones we don't actually do much training on. And the rest of the competencies in the body of knowledge are about writing business cases or putting our schedules together, may have not changed for me personally, but the way we do them has changed. The way that we come together as teams, the way we engage with one another and work professionally has certainly changed over the past 8 months in order to produce our outputs as project professionals. So I'll take you through to the next slide. And I'm going to get a quick poll before I get into this slide, and Rob will do this for us.
Yeah,
so
thank you, Lisa. So questions up on screen. We're really keen to know, was it normal to be working from home prior to the 23rd of March, so the first lockdown? So instantly, we're definitely seeing a stronger answer. And Lisa, I don't know if you got the same crystal ball as Garry earlier, but
well, my thoughts on this question was no, it wasn't the norm, but I had a debate with my husband. It was the norm for him. He's always worked in a virtual team, so I'm very interested to hear, was it the norm?
Okay, well, 84%, 85% of people have responded, and no is currently winning with just over 80%, with yes around the 18 to 20. So yeah, your crystal ball's not far off.
Not far off, and I will be telling the husband that I predicted right, and he wasn't the norm, and he thinks what he does is the norm, but it is now. Wow, that's a lot. 83%. So we're all used to working in the office, so we are all sat at home today. 90% of us are all sat at home today, or in somewhere. So virtually working wasn't the norm, and so on the 23rd of March, we got the UK government. We all remember Boris standing up there saying we must stay at home and certain businesses must close. And that was extremely, for me, I was actually in denial. So on the Friday before, I went and picked up my son from nursery. I said goodbye to the staff and I said, see you in 3 weeks, because that's what we got told. It was a 3-week lockdown. Little did I know, and other parents around me were giving presents to the staff. And I just couldn't get my head around why they were giving staff. Of course, we'd be back in 3 weeks. So back then, I was either in denial of what was happening or ever the optimist. And that just shows you where my mindset was at the start when we got given the announcement. I was ever the optimist and denial. And actually, 4 weeks before that, I travelled to Italy skiing. So yes, I was in complete denial. So the picture up on the screen is, for me, is quite a powerful picture, and there's a reason why I've put that up there. So on that Monday morning, I felt like we were all turned our backs onto our existing way of working. We all had to somehow figure out how we were all going to work from home. Some of us didn't have technology in my team to actually do that with laptops or RAS tokens or any way to get hold of the network, desks, chairs, everything. It was all, where were we going to be sitting, working? And this shows you that we went from this social distancing. We started focusing on our friends and family at this period, and it was an immediate thing that happened to us. I'm not going to dwell on it much longer because we can all feel what happened there, but just to kind of remind us of how far we've come in the past 8 months. And I think what I remind back from then is that we now no longer shake hands, sit together in meeting rooms. We don't go to coffee and lunch together. I rarely, I sit and eat my lunch on my own at the minute. And what I've realised at the start is that I used to walk 3,000 steps to commute to and from the office. And dramatically on that Monday, the first day of working, I did 200 steps between the kitchen and my spare bedroom. So what does this all mean in terms of skills, and how did they evolve over the 3 phases of lockdown? And I'm going to take you through my personal journey over the next slides and go through the skills that I've mentioned earlier and share with you on that story. So over to the next slide, please. So here are the 3 phases. To me, these are how I felt the stages were for me. I think Garry said the first one was pandemic. For me, that was survival mode. Between the 23rd of March and the end of May, I was in pure survival mode. I had a child and a husband at home. And we also celebrated his 4th birthday. And everything was different. It was crisis mode, and everybody around who I worked with was figuring out what it meant for them. Then we went into the second phase, which was making it work. And Garry spoke about this earlier, being disruption. And I think for me, from a feeling and how I felt, is like we got over the initial shock but we realised that the show must go on, and we had our projects to deliver, and we had to work together to get this happened. It wasn't going to change. And at this point, actually, in June and August, my son returned to school, which probably is why I felt like it was making it work. So I had another change then again. And then from September, it was all about, you know, in Garry's talk, he said it's recovery. And I agree. It was about how do we make this sustainable? How do we recover what we do now for the long run? We needed to, for me, it was to look at how can we apply from what I'd learned over the previous 6 months, how I could then continually develop the skills that we'd all developed and still developing. And to me, the making it sustainable was really much about our well-being, being at the centre stage of this phase, because people deliver our projects. And I think over the course of 6 to 8 months, we've realised who are the people, and how actually projects get developed is the people who make up the teams who then deliver the outputs and outcomes of our projects. To the next slide. We've got another poll on the next slide, Rob, before I begin. And there's 2 polls on this, which I'm interested in hearing about.
Excellent, thank you, Lisa. So that poll's live. So are your calendars more or less full than before lockdown? I've certainly got an opinion on that. I won't share it at this time because I don't want to. I'm keen to see the answers, but again, there's a clear leader at the moment. 70% of our guests have participated, so I'll leave it a little bit longer before I share the results. But as shown on the screen, what are your calendars looking like compared to before lockdown? More full, less full, the same? Okay, we're coming up to about 90% complete, so I'm going to close that and share the results. So more full is definitely received the highest votes with 64%, followed by the same at 25% and 11%, and I'm very jealous of those people less full have responded.
And for me, what that poll shows is actually that I think we're learning. We're definitely learning, and I wonder if we did this poll at the start of lockdown, what would that actually look like? Would it have gone more full? And I've certainly seen my calendar as I'll go through my time management change and become more effective as I've got to where we are now. But during this kind of survival mode back up in March to June, I've put kind of an image up in here of keep smiling. We had the rainbow of hope, you know, the rainbow of support and recognition for our NHS in windows across our communities and homes. And, you know, in my house, we still have our rainbow up on our window to show our support. And this for me was a symbol of the time and how I remember that there. And we have moved on, I think, from this, but that was for me. During this time back in May and June, I don't know how you all felt, and we could talk about this forever, how we all felt is, I felt like it was very reactive, very disparate. There was a lot, and what was interesting was a lack of trust I felt in our project teams. Conflict just seemed to escalate, and unrealistic expectations and discomfort all happened from the projects that I were working in. And I think that was because everybody was dealing with their own stress. And how I related this back to the skills of the time is the communication for me, as we've seen on the poll there, at the time for me just escalated it. Because we were all under this heightened, disparate stress, there was a lack of trust, everybody started filling our calendars with meetings. Everybody was checking in, everybody was seeing everybody was okay. I don't know how many Zoom quizzes we all turned up to. I mean, we by the end of this phase, I think we were tired of Zoom quizzes and, you know, all those others. And our teams were constantly wanting to do daily stand-ups. And for me, we were overly communicated, but it was with the right compassion and the right intent to try and do a good job of our projects and to get them to try and focus. But there was a lack of clarity of what we were trying to achieve in these sessions and what were the outputs of what we were trying to do. I think it was the best way. It was all done in good intent. Our time management, well, our working and personal was blurred. We had, for me, I had a child, a husband in the house, so I didn't know whether I was coming or going. In the mornings, I would get up super early and do my 7 to 8 hours of work till 1 o'clock. In the afternoon, then my husband would then take over and do his work, and we did split shifts of both trying to work full time and look after a child. And so I ended up finding that I was then in conflict and negotiation, not really with my work colleagues and project teams, it was actually with my husband and the family, of how I was going to do my job and he was going to do his job. There was also kind of client expectations of working and productivity. The message of course, I was the complete in denial, and I was an optimist back at the start, saying goodbye to the nursery ladies there. I was setting the client expectations that I could keep continuing at the work pace that I was setting and still working at the same productivity. Also, we were a little bit, the client I was working with was, we had to be slower to go into lockdown on that 23rd. So we were still expected to go into the office. We all then set up our makeshift desks. And there was a heightened sense of stress, I think, because of all this was happening. And it was just, for me, there was this phase was focused more around individuals getting by, doing their own things and coming to terms with it. So I think there's another poll for here, just to kind of understand around the video calls increasing. It may be the same, so it'd be good to hear this.
Nice. Thank you, Lisa. So that one's live, and again, I've seen an instant clear leader at the moment, shall I say. So, and it's quickly, rapidly changing, but not to great levels. So thank you everyone for getting involved in the polls. I can see close to 80% of those on the event have joined in, which is great. So I'll bring it to an end very soon. But yeah, I can share. 91% have said yes, 6% have said it's the same, and 4% said no. So yes is a clear winner there.
Yeah, so we're all getting more connected. And I think this is what's happened, and this is from the survival mode going onto the next slide and making it work. And I think this is what we're now seeing in it, making it work. Go to the next slide. Next slide. There it is. So I think with this phase from me was from June to the end of August, and these skills then started to evolve. Team development, the team was definitely getting a level of trust were increasing. We were working together. I think those who team calendars on the previous poll are less or the same. It definitely got, I would say, and I'd love to ask you, was it because the trust in your teams actually kind of started working a bit closer together? Were you trusting each other and you were more output focused? And I saw that. I saw lots of my daily meetings drop to 3 times a week. And that's because we all knew what we were doing and we trusted each other to go off and deliver what we needed to deliver and come back to the project team as a group to do and to bring that where we were up to on progress. Our new ways of working and working patterns emerged. I started realizing that I was working a shift pattern rather than a 9-to-5 job. So I started adding footnotes to my emails, and I still have it now about how I flexibly work, so people know that I have gone to work a different working pattern to everywhere else. And that is probably the biggest change that I've seen over lockdown, is that actually people are more accepting of working outside of the 9-to-5 normal core hours, and that they may get an email a little bit later at night just because I am doing childcare duties. And I just think we got into a groove. The communications and the daily calls eased, calls became more focused. Communication, we started, and we're starting to use tools. We've just had the poll there. We're all using our videos. We're getting connected. We started knowing how to do technology. And you can see on the photo there, that's actually me in my garden, looking after my son during my afternoon shift when I had to be on a conference call with an extension cable to our garage because my battery was running out of this long call. Trying to look after my child here, and he was looked after. He was happy on the swing, but we were engaged. What we started, and what I'm showing there is that my work colleagues started to understand that I was human. I had a child. They would be very much part of the team, and I think that was probably one of the absolute beautiful bits that we've seen from lockdown, is that we have honorary members now on our team, and we understand that what we have behind us and that the people behind our projects really truly know how to do it, and that helps us get through the stress that we're all under at the minute. We've also kind of got some of our offices started to reawaken. and people could meet face to face, that actually arised for me some conflict within our teams that I was working with. There was a lot of varied kind of stress, whether that they were getting anxious about going back in, whether it was, you know, some people needed it for their well-being. So there was a lot of new skills that had to be adapted. For me, it was around listening to people, understanding their and a level of personal resilience. I was hearing a lot of stories from people, and I had to build my own resilience, and also assertive skills as well during this period, because we had to give out messages of what they can and cannot do, no longer around health and safety of our projects, making sure that they could go out to site with the right safety in mind. And that was all around this when the offices reawaken. So, but in this time, I think because my child went back to school, I was able to restart and create time for CPD. I started to attend webinars, and it went back to the same as pre the pandemic, and that was a great place for getting some headspace and to start thinking. The previous phase, we were just kind of getting by, where this phase was very much about getting the team back together, putting in the mechanics and logistics of how we're going to deliver the outcome that we were all here to do. So for me, this was still very much setting up and getting things moving, but not necessarily how people were doing. I still think that was still not there in our project teams. We knew what we had to deliver. We were all doing it really well, but still there was me stood outside looking after a child and working. And I think there's a poll on this slide. Have we? There's a poll. Yes.
Yep. So thanks, Lisa. So this
is the last poll, I believe, of this.
It certainly is. So this is linked to meetings and that they've been interrupted. We all, myself and Gary and Lisa, were talking about the YouTube video of the gentleman having a video call and his child came in the background. But Lisa, a quick one about your engineering there with getting the power down to the swing. Very impressive.
Yes, I know. We had an outdoor plug in the garage that stayed out all week. I'm just thankful that it was warm during the summer, during the spring or summer, whenever it was. I don't really remember anymore.
I'm not an engineer and I don't know a lot about materials, but maybe you could get a little generator in the swing, so when your son goes backwards and forwards, he generates the energy to power your mobile phone. Maybe that's a
it sounds like a great idea. Yeah, definitely.
Apologies. Back to this poll, and people have definitely responded, so I'll close that in the meantime. 90% of people have said that they've been interrupted during a meeting, with 10% saying that they haven't.
And I think for me, this realised, if we move to the next slide, this is the new norm. We are going to be interrupted by delivery. I've had delivery orders on, I've had Amazon deliveries, people taking Amazon deliveries. I've seen a lot of dogs. My team, my project team, I've met my child. Luckily, they don't need to meet him anymore because he's now back at school. But I think it's normal, isn't it? And we've now got new colleagues, which is fabulous. And now I think we're into the phase of, I'm certainly in the phase, and I really hope everybody else is trying to make this sustainable. We are now here for the long haul. Hopefully, some of my team are able to get out to site, so they are getting that fresh air out on a construction site. But we are virtually, for me, the virtual teams now, we are very much virtual teams. I was reminding myself of the body of knowledge the other day, and there's a whole section of virtual teams, and I'm so pleased to see that, because that is what we do now, isn't it? We are connecting better digitally. I mean, I think I've seen the APM run so many more webinars over lockdown than ever before, and because we're just so more adept at, I'm more adept at technology. And I'm now using more platforms than ever before with stakeholders to engage with them. So I'm now using different technologies that, if you said a year ago, you know, you're going to do your post-it notes and flip chart paper and pens and doing a virtual workshop, that was a skill I don't think I knew how to do, definitely not certainly 8 months ago. But now I'm running workshops virtually with post-it notes. And today, I mean, at the start of lockdown, I was having Skype open and a teleconference number, and now I'm doing it on one platform, because we've all learned how to do it, and we've all been through this together, learning how to virtually work and actually get the best to deliver our projects. The workplace stress, I think for me, this is something that does need to continually be improved, and especially with the fact that we don't physically see each other's, how visually anybody anymore. I take a lot of communication clues from how people use their hands and their body language. And over calls now, I am finding it difficult to identify and manage workplace stress and how this is coming. So we're now running a campaign at Turner Townsend of "Are you okay?" and making sure that we always take the time out at the start of meetings to ask people, are they okay? Or to kind of put in some, we have a thing called coffee roulette, where we spin the roulette every month, and then we meet somebody new. So we start broadening our social networks and connecting with new people as well, because it can become quite siloed in your, I imagine you're all somewhere in a spare room or your dining room table. I can't visualize it. It's all very, very strange, isn't it? It's that talking to a laptop today. But I think for me, it's just understanding how we can help others, how we can be part of their team, even though we're not physically connected. And I think for me personally, it's been recognizing my own triggers and how I release workplace stress. And this has been something that I'm continually evolving doing, because it's an emotive topic, isn't it? I mean, for me, I've seen a lot of good people encouraging us to go and do our daily exercise, go for walks. That wasn't me. So now I've had to find my own ways to do workplace stress, and I found doing some jigsaws at the weekend a brilliant way of doing that. Communication. So I think for me and the team, I'm getting positive feedback that key messages that were very much misunderstood at the start are landing more successfully. We, in the projects that I've worked with, have actually kind of taken stock over the past couple of months to actually look and redevelop our communication strategy. We've pulled it out of that bottom drawer and make sure we're actually actively using our communication plan, and we're adapting it to the way that our stakeholders need it to be used, and because everybody's communication styles have changed. I've talked about, our remote facilitation skills and informal catch-ups as well. One thing we've done as a team, though, is actually we've realised that we needed to clearly define our roles and responsibilities. So we've done a lot of work in the last month to actually go through our RACI, go through the good old RACI matrix that we'd always be doing originally, and then somehow that brilliant project tool that we've got seems to have got forgotten, and now we've dusted it off and we looked at it, and it's allowed us to have those good discussions to actually understand and articulate our role, so everybody has a clear role and responsibility in the project and know how to play their role. We've also started about what our organisation's teams would like to be for the future. So we've started to look at the culture of our teams, understanding what our goals are for the next year ahead, and actually kind of starting to pull together. And I think for me, it's kind of September, new school year it was, and I think we've done that with our projects and tried to reinvigorate them and to get them more focused what we're trying to achieve, and to get them more refined, and pulling our stakeholders back into know what the goal is of what we're trying to do. And as always, I think this will always continue, our personal and professional lives are even more closely intertwined than ever before. I've got no longer an IT or anybody in the office who helped me with a printer anymore. It was my husband this afternoon who was helping me struggle to print out some of the notes for this session. And I think we need to embrace that. I think that's something we shouldn't shy away from. So for me, there's been really much a refinement about our skills in leading, monitoring the teams and the stakeholders. And we've learned very quickly as individuals together how we are refining our leadership skills, our team working skills, and how our communication skills, without going on a training course, but just learning by doing. And we've become more effective in our ways of working, is what I've observed. And I think for me, it's brought our teams much closer together. I've seen there's been some kind of, for me, some being more aware of our potential for change. I think there is a lot more we can do, and I think that's great, but also understanding what's a non-negotiable. So I'm now finding that a non-negotiable for me is actually that I get a workout in the morning before I start work. For me, one thing I've experienced is actually how we onboard and bring new people into project teams virtually. This is now happening more than ever now. We had new people start at the beginning of lockdown in my project, and that person has done remarkably well. As one person of how they joined our team and got on board, but I'm now joining a new project at the moment to project manager a new one at the moment. And it's very interesting now how we're going to onboard this team and get ourselves connected very quickly, because we're not able to sit around the table. So we're trying to apply all our learnings over the last 8 months of how we can define our roles and responsibilities, what the outputs are and what the outcomes of our project and who's doing what. And kind of making sure that in this new team that I'm setting up is how we grab 10 minutes. So I'm going to conclude on to the next slide and just talk about some top tips from what I've kind of observed over lockdown. So for me, it's actually making sure that communication is extremely simple and clear. It's making sure we've heard that the message is actually landed, and emails is not all, you know, we need to make sure that email has been understood or what we've said has been heard. And for me, this hasn't changed. This has always been a thing we've had to work on before lockdown, but at the same time, I think it's more prevalent than ever because we can't physically, you know, always be seeing each other. I think we need to talk about and protect the good things that happened over lockdown. I love the fact that I could work more flexibly and be with my child more, and I think for some of this we do need to protect and look at, and as teams and project teams to think about what was happening. We don't need to just keep marching on and, you know, continue to pray. What is it we want to save, and what did we do really well there? We talked a lot about it, the lessons learned we have applied. I read a lot of there, but actually have we saved and protected those good things? Personally, it's like creating that opportunity for some headspace. We've had mental well-being a few weeks ago, but that is for me really, really important. How do we create that headspace? I sometimes think we're sat behind our laptops, and I do question, do people think am I being productive or not? Finding that water cooler and coffee moment chat. So reach out to people, broaden your networks and get that, chat those informal chats through the call. They don't have to be scheduled as a meeting. Just pick up the phone and have a chat, and making sure we ask our teams, are they okay? Ultimately, we are all part of project teams, and we are the people who deliver them and we are those build, as Garry said earlier. But they will only be successful if we are all okay in this. Our well-being is at the heart of it. Schedules will be produced, business cases will be produced, but we are the people who make all them. So we need to continue to make sure we're okay and keep evolving our skills into the future. So I just want to thank you very much, and I'll just hand it over to Rob and Garry.
Excellent. Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Garry. We've had some lovely comments come in from the delegates to say thank you for sharing your knowledge, and there's some questions as well. I'll go directly to Garry first. Garry, I wonder if you could answer this one from Catherine, who said, what changes do you see coming to the project profession or accelerated due to the pandemic?
Thanks, Rob. Very good question. I think it's probably twofold. I think with the reliance on digital, be it platforms, communication platforms, also tools, how we can do our projects, remote monitoring of progress on a project. So I think there's going to be an advancement of digital tools because we can't get to sometimes where projects are located, and obviously the tools and technologies such as Teams and Zoom, it's just advancement of those platforms. I also think aligned to what Lisa was saying, I think our kind of core skill sets as project professionals we probably need to sharpen a wee bit, particularly when we're not seeing people face to face. So I think we're going to need to, I suppose, get closer to the communication skills, like stakeholder skills that perhaps we took for granted. And yeah, I think also I've got to add as well is likes of business cases. The skills that we have as project professional business cases, we're going to have to really focus on those because the business cases may have changes as a result of the pandemic. So I think we just need to focus on that. So hopefully that answers your question, Catherine.
Excellent. Thank you, Garry, and thank you, Catherine, for the question. Lisa, I'll come back to you if I could. Question, I'm trying to combine a couple of questions. So John and Alan have mentioned when you talked about your diary becoming back to back, did you put in place any strategies to manage this?
Yes, I do, and they evolve. So I've started blocking out time in my diary of when I keep free. So I block them, and I have to be extremely disciplined on this, that I use them times. For me, they're my either productivity hours where I can actually get down and do stuff and actually do, get stuff written down or sent out and done. So I just protect my diary now and not allow my diary to be managed by others, which is what I allowed at the first part of lockdown. So I would, block out your diaries. It's your diary. It's nobody else's diary.
Excellent. Yeah, wise words and great top tips that you shared. I think Alan misses the kind of the interaction from one meeting to another, having little chats and swapping additional information. So yeah, that's great. So Garry, I've had a question from Chris, who has said, have you experienced a different response from public sector clients compared to private clients in terms of their flexibility to adjust to the pandemic?
That's another really good question. I think I put in my presentation, certainly the large public sector clients have been, certainly what we've seen is support. I think it ties back to UK government and keeping the economy afloat and getting money to the supply chain quickly. And certainly that's my experience. I've seen that at close hand. Similarly, private sector as well. I've seen some instances where private sector have done something similar as well, just to protect the supply chain, because ultimately the supply chain, keeping them afloat is the success of our projects. But in my own personal experience, it's been more closer to the kind of large public sector clients and support that's been given to supply chain. I think have been very, very welcome.
Excellent, thank you, Garry, and I hope that helps, Chris. Lisa, I'll come back to you. I'll go from one to another. Lisa, you mentioned conflict resolution. Oliver's asked, how did you manage your own personal resilience?
For me, my resilience has been tested. I now have to make sure that I get in some exercise. I find ways to relieve stress, and that's, for me, is the way I manage my resilience, is making sure that I find time for myself and headspace. So podcasts, getting some exercise in, I'll do a jigsaw, and actually for me is when we can go for a walk now with a friend. So I did that the other day for 3 hours, and it was good to get some resilience, because you need that. If you're stressed, you're not going to be able to deal with a conflict. That's how I've dealt with it, but it is evolving. It is something I've realized. It's one of those skills that it needs to be honed in on.
Excellent, thank you very much. So Garry, David has asked, are you seeing many projects where the business case is being reviewed as a result of the pandemic?
Yes, I think in the presentation I quoted certainly aviation and transportation, where the business cases are highly predicated on passengers and passenger numbers and stuff. And obviously the pandemic has made certainly some of these large clients reevaluate the business case from the positive and from negative, because there's some things that have increased. And so I've seen a lot of clients reviewing the business case, and using that to either hold, pull back, delay, or even cancel projects. But also some clients saying, well, things have changed, and okay, what I originally set out to do, I need to change that, and therefore revisit the business case and adjust the project to suit. So I'm seeing it quite a bit just now, particularly in the kind of sector I work in infrastructure. It's heavily dependent on certainly passenger numbers.
Thank you, Garry. So I'm aware of the time, and I know we've hit the half-past mark, but I'm going to be a bit cheeky because I'm keen to know the answer myself. Lisa, you talked about leadership styles and adapting over lockdown. How did your leadership style change, and were there any impacts of resulting from this?
Oh, interesting question. For me, I'm much more of a facilitator approach. You probably can tell in the style of how I present. I'm much more of a collaborator. Everybody plays their part in the team and empower people to get on with it. At the start of lockdown, it became very much a leadership style of command and control. And that is not my natural style. It was extremely uncomfortable to go into more of a, it was very much, let's get the team together, let's get them focused, and let's get, everybody, thinking towards that goal. That's, for me, it was a very different approach to my natural style. The impact on it, I think the team welcomed it. They needed that. It was difficult, though, going back then to a facilitative approach. I found it very tricky adapting from different types of leadership styles over such a short time in the 8 months of what the team have needed to do. Impact on myself has been, I needed to make sure I go out for more walks and stuff, because it's been a skill you've had to learn quite quickly overnight, and it wasn't a natural skill to learn from your own style to what you need. So now I feel like we're back more in that facilitative style now of where we are now. So it's a lot more comfortable and natural way of leading the team. So yes, that's first one. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I'm sure your team were very grateful for you adapting your styles and supporting them during what has been a tough and challenging time for all. So I think on that point, I'll bring this to an end. But Garry and Lisa, I'll definitely send you through the lovely comments. So Andrew, for example, Tatiana have all said, thank you very much for a great webinar, very helpful. And there's a number of comments along those lines. I would personally like to say thank you on behalf of the APM and everyone that's attended today for your time and your expertise and taking the time to answer the questions. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And on behalf of the APM, I'd also like to say thank you to everyone who's joined us today.